You are watching
We
Xirtus.
transcribed Zohar for over 10 years, but we
Mhm.
spent 2.5 of those years transcribing the 2 sections of the Zohar that predict 9/11 overtly to the day and year. Like
It's kind of a big deal.
it's kind of it's one of the it's the biggest deal of my life in terms of my own studies is that and what we did with that because I brought that to him. I saw that reference by somebody who Andreas has interviewed, Leo Zagami. He made a statement that was
His
kind of like
birthday was
matter of fact. He's like 9/11. That's in the Zohar. So I went and I dug to see what references that was, and I spent 2.5 years. As far as I know, like I don't know anyone else who's taken the time to translate that. It's not something that exists in English. The commentary from the Zohar from Ramak from the 16th century about that. So
Yeah.
like I have that written out. I had it written in longhand. My friend helped me transcribe that so that I beyond that so that I could actually have it in text form. So like I that's like a lot of work, but it's explicit. So like and what 9/11 is all about. And like it's not what the way that the treatment of people like I'm convinced that like the Wachowski brothers, sisters, whatever, like that they had at least access to the first section of this, which is much smaller, which is also reads kind of like propaganda, where it's like Israel will act mightily and this and that. Like the reason why 9/11 is on the passport in the Matrix for 2001 9/11, like the reason why that's there in my view is because of access to this stuff from the Zohar. So like I don't know that in any absolute terms because unless if they told me directly, I could just call it a sync or whatever.
It kind of
Yeah.
bothers me how far people have fallen. So like I mean, just like 25 years ago, we were all aware that the world changed so much. I was just rewatching that show, That's My Bush, the show about Bush as a
Mhm.
sitcom president. And just
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's a perfect pivotal explanation of how different the world is now and how different it was then. But really, you can see the changes when they canceled the show because September 11th changed America. At a
Right.
certain, we could have Skull and Bones. This is the episode where Bush has his Skull and Bones frat buddies. Remember coming to the White House, and he has to prove he's not soft. So he is going to invite them to an execution, but he has crisis actors for the execution who are all an improv troupe. Like the level of where we were in 2001 was insanely just like it was just an open portal with babies pouring out. And then September 11th, boom, everything changes. We have to take everything to a new place of authoritarian, scared, safety, with the restriction of your freedom was
Yes.
so it's insane. And I don't think people really get anymore the way we used to really focus on this point. And we made episodes, and you made the Sync books, Sync Press, all this amazing um, evidence of how the world shifted so quickly and why we predicted this would shift. But yeah, like in the Matrix, they kind of make that point. September 11th, 2001 is the death of his passport. Why is it important
Mhm.
that his passport agency, so his free agency from capital city? There's just so many levels to this, which seems so clear. Thomas Anderson, son of man, doubting Thomas. I just
Yeah, it's
thought
also twin. Thomas means twin. Think
I
about that.
hadn't thought about that at all. No,
Right.
there you go. There's just like you just can't help it with the references in this thing. They did this so hard, so fast, and I don't think anyone remembers anymore what the world was like. I honestly, it's hard to explain to people what it was like to live in a free world. The world was so free at some point. I mean, yeah, September 11th. So why do you think that that's the case from your understanding of the Zohar? I mean, I know we've talked about this to some extent, even with the Back to the Future predicts 9/11. But why is, tell me, Cassandra.
Well, like I say, that there's 2 sections. The first one is much shorter, and I think more people have been given access to this. Just not even. I'm not talking about the commentary from Ramak, which is really the enlightening thing of it that I got the most out of. But like the 2 sections, like the first one has these statements where it's like Israel act mightily, and like Israel obviously isn't a nation until late 40s and 19th century, but if you consider like the treatment of it is kind of like it reads like propaganda kind of. Whereas, like the second section, especially with the commentary, doesn't speak highly of Israel in the future. So it's like following this event that happens where these 2 strongholds and a palace are destroyed. It says that the king will be killed, but then when you look at the commentary, it says the king that's killed is actually Samael, it's an archetypal king. It's the king of the demons. It's not a physical king. And so it makes a whole point of that. But it says that the whole world witnesses on one side of our brain, in the collective hemisphere of humanity, we all saw the king of the demons die on September 11th, 2001, or that we will. And then following that, there's an interim between that event and the implementation of a one world government. And so that interim is basically characterized by this, what it describes as kind of this cognitive dissonance of us to come to terms with what it was that we know ended on one side of our brain. We know that this thing ended, that the old eon is gone, and that during that transition time, the powers of the world try and take everything they can from the old eon as though it still has value when it doesn't anymore. So it's like they're trying to gain power from something that's already lost its power. So it gets really deep. So it's this idea is that we have this evolutionary transition that's taking place that is the primary spiritual dimension of what's happening. And then in the world of form, as we're relating to the most topical level of it, we see this kind of like grasping for power that's really empty. Like it doesn't actually provide what it used to provide all through human history. So it's like no matter what, this transformation is taking place, but then on the superficial level, which has to do with mammon, it's all about money and trade, that everyone's basically like clinging to the old world and going crazier and crazier, trying to consolidate the power. And once they have it completely consolidated and they have that one world government, the whole thing flips on its head because it's of no value in the end. In other words, like if you can't have ultimately just like the smallest group controlling everybody, because the nature of the pyramid is that the power is actually in the base of the pyramid. It's not actually at the top, and it's an illusion to think otherwise. And we won't know that it's an illusion until we actually see it in its full expression, is the idea. So it's like, it's kind of hard to explain that, but it's that that small group of people doesn't actually have any power. Once the power is that consolidated, the whole thing turns on itself, because how can they control all the people? Like
I mean, kind of, but also something I talked to Richard Gage recently. He's like the head or the founder of the 9/11 Architects for Truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him this one question that's been plaguing me since forever about why make the Twin Towers and Building 7 fall in their own footprints, because it was like leaving a big bloody handprint on a crime scene and leaving. Like, why leave this thing that's so obvious? Right. Why not have it just kind of like crack over sideways like a normal plane hitting? And the explanation was like threefold, but the thing that impressed me the most that I hadn't considered was that it had to fall into its own footprint because, and I'll paraphrase some of this, he didn't talk about how many people died, but in my mind, 3,000 people, tragedy, but nowhere close to just like a conflict that might happen in one day anywhere else in the world, right? So what is it about these 3,000 people? It's not really about the people. It's not even about the building and the tall building. It's about almost like rubbing your face in shit and then saying like, oh no, that's not shit. You know what I mean? Like, right. It's making you lie to yourself in such a huge way. And that's the real turning point. It wasn't the buildings falling. It wasn't the people dying. It was like, how far can we push you so that you won't even question it? And I can't remember if it was Colby or if it was one of the other CIA directors, but the quote is like, we will know when the CIA has done its job, when everybody is just believing pure propaganda and pure misinformation.
That's right.
And it's like a physical representation of that, like, huge milestone.
I want to see that conversation. That's totally the whole point of kind of where this ends up going. And I'm really like resonant with Judy Wood, like Dr. Judy Wood's idea of where do the towers go and the dustification idea, because they literally like disintegrated. And like you have those 10 survivors on the second story of Tower 2 that there's the Canadian documentary about, where they describe that these buildings collapsed on top of them, and yet after their collapse they see light coming in from above. So it really is a serious question of like, where the freak did the towers go? So I resonate with that completely. Like, that's the mind control element, that we're literally, it's an example of that Orwellian thing where we're being told 2 + 2 = 5 instead of 4, when we know what it is. And that's also like a lot of the things that we're seeing. Like, that's my feeling on like the trans stuff too, is it's like, or at least what like Dave Chappelle would have to say about it, where it's like, you know, his Andy Kaufman bit with Jim Carrey, where it's like, dude, I know, and we know, but we have to treat it otherwise. That was an argument from Norman O'Brown in his book Life Against Death, of his criticism of the organized church's version of Christianity was that to get people to accept something that they know is an impossibility, and as once they accept it, it means that it's no holds barred on everything else that follows. So if you wanted to use 9/11 as an excuse for all this other stuff, you need them to, like, there's a value in people accepting something that they're denying what their eyes are looking at. Like, they see something and they're in denial about it, which is literally what I'm describing about the Zohar. It says we know what we saw, but we can't come to terms with what we saw because there's this, something in the way of that.